Warning: the following video may be classified by self-proclaimed, allegedly unbiased, independent fact-checkers. Proceed at your discretion.
Even just sharing the story goes a million ways, and that is all I can ever ask for from somebody. Is if they believe that what they see in this video or the videos on that website are wrong, then share it and let other people know what happened, because that really does a lot.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Devlin Gannon. He's a real bright, composed young man who's just going to protests, freedom rallies in Calgary, and who was treated very unfairly and inappropriately by the police, the Calgary Police, and this is his story.
All right, Devlin, thank you for coming on and taking the time to do this with me. Normally, as a kind of fellow truth seeker, I do try to stay on top of what's happening out there, certainly when it comes to local stories like yours. But everything happens so fast with the news and information coming and going and everything. And, I'm a pretty busy guy as well. And initially, I hadn't heard about your story. I had missed it, and it was actually Jesse Johnson of Without Papers Pizza, who I interviewed not that long ago, who kind of turned me to your story.
A friend of mine, Devlin, was arrested on Saturday for essentially not backing out of a park quick enough, and he stood up for his rights, which everybody thinks was wrong, but I believe that those rights were entitled to him. Perhaps Canadians might think the brashness of him having the audacity to stand up for his rights was wrong, but he does have the right, and literally all this kid was doing was the police officer's job, in my opinion.
I went to look it up, and I was able to find some videos on the incidents that you were involved in. So, to open up this dialogue, before we get into the incidents you were involved in, maybe you can start by just, introducing yourself, tell us who you are, give us a little bit of background on what it is that you're doing, your involvement with this freedom movement, how long you've been attending these protests in Calgary, just kind of what your general experience has been on these weekly protests.
Yeah, of course. Well, first off, thanks for having me, and shout out to Jesse, because he's a great man, and I appreciate him shedding some light on my situation. Really, it's been crazy, to say the least. Like you said, to summarize my whole situation in all of this has been, I started going to the freedom rallies with the sole intent of documenting what was happening there. There is, like, from the very get-go, with a camera, and I had a YouTube channel that I was putting things up onto, and I was always there every single one that I went to document it. And my YouTube started getting banned for, like, the speeches from the rallies or certain things that would be on signs during the marches and things like that. So I made my own website and started putting all my things on there, just, to get around censorship, essentially. And so awakeningthepeople.net is where I've been essentially putting everything and running that website now for almost a year and a half, 2 years. And besides just being there with my camera to record speeches, and I would always stand at the front of the march and have the march go against me, and just have the whole crowd of however many people were there come against my GoPro camera, and then they would show a front to back distance of how really big the crowd was. And it showed over this year and a half how much these rallies were growing, because these videos would go from like 5-minute videos to 12-minute videos, 15-minute videos at times when the crowds were really big. So that's what it kind of started with. And then I evolved into doing actual, like, public interviews as well. So I'd go down, I had a camera person, and I'd have a microphone, and I'd just interview every age demographic, every profession, like anybody that I could get to talk, I would get to talk, because, as you know, I'm sure, they love to demonize these things. They love to label these things. And I'm talking mainstream media here, who are never even down to cover something like this. They don't come down, they don't interview, but they put out their stories and they label us. So I was doing my best to really show the world what is actually happening. And who actually goes down and how the people there are, loving, peaceful, and very varying in demographic. And essentially, yeah, that was the main reason I was there. And the movement grew, and I was always there covering it. And I got to know a lot of people, Jesse Johnson being one of them, and thousands of other people that are out every Saturday downtown.
Yeah, so like I've only been to a couple of these rallies myself, and from what I saw, it seemed like a very warm, welcoming, positive atmosphere.
Yeah.
And as someone who's like, trying to keep an eye on these sorts of stories and this movement, I didn't really remember any stories of anything really violent or inappropriate happening at these weekly rallies, which have been going on for quite a while, right? Even before you started attending, this was happening. So, am I getting that right? Have you been seeing like basically peaceful protests, or has there been some sort of a shift or escalation in bad behavior that was leading up to something inevitably more intense?
Yeah, I mean, to summarize, really, over the last year and a half, it's been loving, it's been peaceful. There's been families, dogs, pets of all sorts, and elderly and young people. Like, there's no room for violence, and there never was violence. And the rallies had always been organized with police entirely being part of what was going on. They were informed in every way as to when and where the rally would occur. They were given the route that the march was planned to go on, so that they could go and shut down the the side avenues that roads would be, infringing upon our march, to make sure that there was no traffic issues. So it was peaceful, and it was lawful, and it was always organized. It was always loving. And yeah, the escalation that has happened has been within the last, I'd say, about a month and a half, 5-6 weeks of the rallies occurring, which every Saturday they happen. And what we saw people from our city council, we saw our mayor, we saw the chief of police starting to really vocally label the rally that had been occurring in totally wrong ways. We saw things that they were saying that are just not true. They were labeling us as white supremacists. They were labeling us as misogynistic and hateful and violent and stuff. And it was crazy to see, because I mean, they were never down there, and I've never seen something of the sort. And so our city council members and others were calling for counter protesters to essentially go down into the Beltline where the march would take place and try and disrupt it. And we saw different variations of it. Sometimes, like, there was a little small group, and the rally would just kind of go around that little group in the middle. And then the group grew bigger, and they were on the side of the road, and the police were in between the rally and these counter protesters, and the protesters were, being all hateful towards the thousands of people marching, but we still got to go by and unimpeded and do our thing. And then another weekend came by, and these counter protesters had then started to blockade the road and fill up the roadway and not allow the march to even go the way that it's planned with the police. And so that instance, we went around and we diverted to another side street, and we totally, avoided them. And the police, again, were standing in between the thousands of us and the 20 counter protesters to make sure nothing happened. And then the following weekend, again, they blockaded again. And this time the blockade, there was the intent of these thousands of people is essentially uncontrollable. Nobody is leading this march. Nobody is telling everybody where or what to do, because I mean, you can't. There's 1,000 people or more. And that weekend ended up being the march didn't go around because there was no side street we could turn on right away when this blockade happened. And so everybody just stopped. And the sentiment became like, okay, well, we're just going to wait here until like the police do the job of moving these 20 people off the road. And eventually that happened after about an hour and a half of just standing in the street and like waiting for the police to move 20 people who were illegally blockading the road. So, I mean, the freedom community of thousands is just partying in the street and, dancing to music, waiting. because this march would usually be a 15-minute thing at most for each business, and we'd be in and out, going, constantly moving. And this time around, it became like a whole big deal because we're stopped in the road, couldn't go anywhere. And the whole complaint of these counter protesters was that we apparently are disturbing their downtown core beltline every Saturday. And disturbing is a light word because they have used much more descriptive words, calling us like terrorists terrorizing the beltline every Saturday. And so anyways, they made it a bigger issue. We were there for longer. The businesses were shut down for longer. And then so the following weekend after this, after the time that they stopped us all on the road for an hour, we saw this whole thing in Calgary happen with the court injunction. And I don't know if you're familiar specifically with the injunction, but these rallies happen every Saturday. And this emergency court injunction came out Friday night, right before the rally happens the next day.
Sorry, Devlin, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. I just want to get a timeline clear on this. So at what point did you start hearing this kind of language about the way that they're describing you guys as all these inappropriate, like white nationalists, all this stuff, and then counter protesters being kind of called on? At what point did that start becoming a thing?
I would say it would be like the end of February, start of March is when we started seeing the narrative and vocabulary specifically coming from the city council, the police chief, and the mayor pretty drastically changed. The mayor started saying that we're not protesters, we have no right to be down there, that it's a parade and not a protest, and that the mandates are all lifted and that we have no reason to be there, and we're terrorizing the downtown core every Saturday and making residents super uncomfortable. And the police chief started calling our group the anti-democracy group, the group that was down there in the thousands, different people every weekend. They started labeling them as anti-democracy. And so the vocabulary really changed. And we literally had city council members who are sitting on the board, Courtney Walcott being one of them, specifically tweeting about how it's a bunch of white supremacists down there and quoting like Vice articles from the United States about protests that have nothing to do with Calgary and trying to relate them to Calgary, and then saying like, we need you to go down there and stop these people from being there. And so it was about, the end of February, start of March that it really changed, because we genuinely had like the police chief saying, these are legal, peaceful, lawful protests. It may be bothering people, but they're not breaking laws, they're being legal. And like that was things he was saying prior to that. And then it just, nothing changed at these protests, but the whole narrative from their end changed in every way.
So right around February is when you're kind of saying is when you started to see this sort of shift. And these protests have been going on for quite some time, for there to have never been any mention or complaint about this white supremacist group of people that are showing up every week on the same day at the same place. So, because I was going to ask about that, because, like I was watching the Freedom Convoy happening in Ottawa, and, there was sort of a similar thing that happened there before it happened here, right? There was this peaceful protest, and then, people like Justin Trudeau and, other government leaders kind of start using that sort of language and describing what's going on there in an untruthful way. And then there was a small counter protest as well that sort of made its way into Ottawa and started, taking up space there as well, and having their voices heard, doing their little small counter protest. And I was going to ask, like, was there ever, prior to this February, March timeline that you're giving me, was there ever counter protests being organized and coming in big numbers to your space, or did this really just start at this timeline?
Yeah, no, it definitely started at that timeline. Like there had been very, very minimal instances of like maybe 1 to 2 people who would show up and intently like be there to tell people to stop. And this goes back to rallies that aren't even really associated with this Saturday rally. There was things happening when COVID started at hospitals sometimes and at schools sometimes. These are definitely, I would say, unrelated to this every Saturday thing. And there were instances that I'd heard of, never seen myself, of counter protester interactions outside of like the Calgary Foothills Hospital when there was some protesters there. And there was other ones I heard about at the Sheldon Schumer Medical Center as well downtown. But in relation to these protests, no, there was never any kind of people showing up in any way at all until come end of February, start of March. And
Okay.
it's been the same small group. You can see the same people are there every time, and there's clearly a leader who's there, like hyping them up. Some of them have volunteer badges on. Like, it's very strange. It's what some would classify as, and even our police chief has said, professional protesters.
Right.
And that's not what you get from the freedom community at all. It's working everyday class people of every type that are down there.
So from what I understand, so you guys been protesting every week, every Saturday, and there hasn't been any issues really being brought up until recently, February of 2022. And then things, I guess, quickly start to escalate. And so I think the date is March 19th. I think that's the last protest that you were involved in, where the police kind of started throwing their weight around a little bit. And so, you were talking about sort of a change to a policy or an order, something surrounding, the right to protest, something changed, and so, if you don't mind, for anyone who's watching this who maybe doesn't understand the context of the situation, can you maybe sort of set the table on what changed about this particular rally on this particular date and why the police were there taking the kind of action that they were taking?
Of course. So I briefly kind of got into the injunction that they pushed forward. And so this injunction came out the Friday night right before the rally started at 7 p.m. So the rally's the next day at 1 p.m., less than 24 hours. And the injunction was essentially, to be blunt, to stop protesting in any public park within Calgary. And the rules of the injunction were that you cannot use amplification devices of any sort. So not only, I'm talking megaphones, you couldn't have loudspeakers of any sort. You couldn't have like a PA system for the speeches that had occurred every Saturday. You couldn't have noisemakers. So a lot of people had like air horns and stuff like that. You weren't allowed to use anything like that. And then on top of that, you were permitted to gather in a park. But if you were to be in that park, you could not make it inaccessible to other patrons. So the park had to be essentially allow other people to come in and out of the park. And that was the rule. And then outside of that, there was no marching or shutting down of any roadway allowed, no matter what. So you could not shut down roadways. And then if you were to march on a sidewalk, they were still adding conditions where if you're marching on a sidewalk, you couldn't make it so that businesses were inaccessible for a period of time. And so, I mean, that's all these hoops that they gave for people to jump through. And people, they jumped through them. Everybody that was in the park gathered that day at Central Memorial Park, which is the park that this has happened at over and over and over again. And so everybody got there. There was no loudspeaker set up, no PA system. Nobody had any noisemakers. Nobody's doing anything. And another thing that had started occurring at these rallies was people would set up tables and have like information pamphlets, or there'd be government like bodies or political figures that are running for certain things that would set up their pamphlets there to just give information out. There was people selling things by donation and stuff like that. So they'd also banned any kind of stall or any table or anything being set up. Anyway, so none of this occurred. Everybody gathers there, and it became the sentiment that we were going to go to City Hall, because City Hall was no longer a park. So there had been a PA system set up there, and this injunction wouldn't apply to City Hall because it wasn't a park. So they could have the PA system and everybody could do the speeches that were usually a part of the whole day. So everybody marched over to City Hall legally, lawfully, in different groups, all on the sidewalks, following the crosswalk laws, crossing when they could, and stuff like that. So way different march, quote unquote, than we'd ever seen over the past little while. And so everybody goes to City Hall, the whole event occurs, people do their speeches, there's a couple musical performances, and then it ends. That's it. Bam. That's the usual event. At that point, a march would usually occur, but there was no planned march that day because we weren't allowed to go on the road. The police were not going to escort us. And so I'd say about half, if not less than half, of the patrons that were all at City Hall decided to, well, go back to Central Memorial Park because that's where everybody was parked around. I mean, myself, my vehicle was like a block away from that park, so I had to walk back there. And everybody goes back, same deal, following all the crosswalk laws, no marching on the roads, all that stuff. And once we get back to Central Memorial Park, there was just this crazy police presence there. And the police presence was there. I found out as I kind of arrived and sussed things out a little bit that there was counter protesters at that park, the ones that we had been seeing week to week to week. And these counter protesters apparently had been there for quite a while since we had all left. They had kind of filled up the park after we all left. And the police had a whole interaction with them that none of us were even aware of because nobody was there. And they had kind of quarantined off a bunch of them. There had been arrests made on these counter protesters for breaching the injunction prior to anybody even going back to this park. And so when we got back there, there was maybe 5 to 7 counter protesters left still there, and the police were all around them more or less. And so we kind of all just like gathered in the park a little bit. People were dispersing, going back to their vehicles, and then the police just turned on everyone who had started coming in and made this big long police line and started just pushing everybody back and proceeding their line forward more and more, no matter what. Like all of us were being removed from the park. And just for a bit of context, after this injunction came out, 1 hour later, the chief of police in Calgary, he came out with a statement and said, with this injunction, the protest plan tomorrow is still allowed to happen in Central Memorial Park, so long as they follow all the rules of the injunction. So he even specifically came out and said, like, by the way, this is the park that you can expect people to be in tomorrow, as so long as they follow the rules of the injunction, which everybody had. Don't get me wrong, it did end up moving to City Hall to have a PA system, but even with that being said, none of the rules of this injunction were broken. Like, people lawfully walked there, nobody marched, shut down roads, nothing. So no rules of this injunction were broken. Everybody, less than half of the group had came back to the park to just this massive police presence pushing everyone out. And so during the day, I was doing all the stuff I usually do, interviewing, covering, and I had my mic out, camera person is behind me, and I see the deputy chief of police of Calgary. And I know him by name as Chad Tofik, and I'd seen him before and knew who he was. So I approach him and I ask him, I'm like, well, why are you moving everybody out of the park here? Like, we're here peaceful and what have we done? And he says, you've breached the injunction. And so I ask him, and like, I have it all on camera. I ask him, I'm like, what part? And then he tells me, you can't be in groups of more than 50. And I was like, well, that's not even on the injunction. It's not part of it in any way. And then he said, and you can't be in this park, which again is just like, yes, we can. And so the whole time I'm talking to him, he's got 2 other officers who are just pushing me back the whole time. And so I'm walking backwards and I'm literally conversing with their higher up who's talking back to me the whole time they're pushing me. And so I'm just backing up. I'm backing up. And then he's saying, you can't be in the park in groups of more than 50. And I'm like, well, I'm here by myself and we can be in this park. And so one of the officers, he grabs me by the shirt and hoodie. And so I say, like, don't touch me. And I kind of smack his hand off of my shirt. And just at that point forward, he just grabs me, picks me up some more and throws me back into the group of people. I stumble, catch my footing, kind of stand up again. I'm like, what was that all about? Like, I didn't do anything. What did I do? And then as I'm standing there, another guy grabs me again, and then they try and pull me behind the police line. And so I kind of bend over, and all of my whole top half comes off. I get stripped in the top half. I'm down to like naked and besides my pants. And then I stand up again and I back up. I'm like, what did I do? Like, what did I do? And I have video over and over. I'm saying it.
Right.
And they just kind of surround me and just pounce onto me from all different angles. And they're dragging me around. Like, one officer is trying to take me left. The other officer is trying to take me right. And then another one's grabbing me and trying to pull me towards him. And so I'm being like ragdolled around these guys. And then, yeah, so to go from there, I'm arrested. Yeah.
I'm going to play some of that video, and I'll get you to kind of add your comments to that. So, but before I do that, just want to back up just a little bit. So what you're saying is a whole bunch of you guys have gone to City Hall, and when you come back, the police are dealing with something that has nothing to do with you guys. It's actually something that happened with the counter protesters, that they were not following this new injunction, I guess, or something happened where the police are arresting counter protesters. And then you guys are coming back, and now these guys are all fired up, probably from whatever happened there while you guys were gone, and that's how things sort of escalated to where they got. Is that kind of, I know that's brief, but is that sort of fair to say?
Yeah, no, that's accurate. I would say for sure. And I think a lot of people didn't even really know what was going on with the counter protesters or the police there. I know more after the fact now, because there's been some other news sources that have done like reporting on how there was like actually a big counter protester group that moved in when we weren't there at all. But everybody coming back had no idea like what was even going on with that in any way. So.
Is there any chance that like this particular police chief that you were talking to, that you said you recognize him, you know him by name, do you think he recognizes you? Does he know that you're part of the freedom protests? Or is there any chance that the police at this moment just see lots of people and maybe they think you're part of the counter protest that's not cooperating, that's having all these arrests? Is there any chance? Like, I'm just putting that together right now.
Yeah. I would say, I mean, no, very slim. No. I've been at these things a lot. They've seen like all of us there. It was very clear with our Canadian flags and our signs, and like it's not like I'm holding these things. I got all my equipment and I'm filming stuff, but everybody else has these things that are very clearly associated with the rally. And it was like, I wouldn't say it was the full group of 5,000 people that day, because there was about 5,000, but there was at least, I'd say, people coming back to that park in the upwards of 1,000 people. So it was very clear that this herd of people was not part of that counter protest.
Okay. And so they decided to deal with you the way they did. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up that first clip. Where I think is the first time that they kind of get aggressive with you, and that kind of
escalates.
This is where things start to get out of control. So just give me a moment here. I'm going to pull that up.
Of course. Pretext to everybody here that there is some language. So be aware.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. I know myself.
They got the horses up. Look at them shoving them. Look at them.
Yeah, I am. You're
Stop touching them. Hey. Stop touching them. Hey.
Yeah, I am too. Keep moving. You're
Stop touching them.
Hey.
Get away. Yo, what the?
All right, so that's basically exactly how you described it just a minute ago. So, I'm sure you've rewatched this footage now and replayed this moment in your head like a million times.
Yeah.
So some critics might say, you know, and obviously it's easy for people to say what they would do or they should do when they're not actually in that situation in real time, right? But some critics might say, you know, you're not following instructions from the police and you're not cooperating and you're forcing their hand to increase the intensity of how they have to act. So my question to you is, number one, what do you say to those people? And number two, you know, as you've replayed this incident over and over in your mind, I'm sure, is there anything you would do differently if you were offered a do-over in this, you know, particular moment?
Well, to the first thing, for those people, what I would say is, first of all, from a young age, I've been taught to question questionable authority, and you don't have to comply to unlawful and illegal demands from a police officer. You really don't. And I know what I knew the injunction. I read it and studied it, and I knew that there hadn't been anything done against it that day. And so, first of all, I'm having a conversation with the higher up to these officers who are pushing me, and he's talking back to me even. And so the thing that I have an issue with is the fact that I'm literally trying to converse and they are still pushing me, and I'm walking backwards talking to them at the same time. And so my sentiment to them would be, they are doing something unlawful at the time, so you don't have to specifically comply. And even to the point of compliance, it's not like I'm standing there and pushing against them and saying I'm not leaving. I'm literally trying to inquire with them as to what the reason they are trying to push us out of a park and essentially infringe upon our rights and our constitutional freedoms by doing so. And that's what I'd say is you got to stand your ground and really question questionable authority, because the authority figures will be the ones to overstep their power. And secondly, what I would do differently, in all honesty, is not be there. Like, it was not something I'd want to relive. So if I could avoid it, I would, for sure. I would just, you know, I would not have asked them the question, because I see now, to the point of where it got to, that they didn't have any sense of conversation or de-escalation or even reasoning that was going to occur. And that's from even the point of me talking to the point of me being face down in the dirt. There was not any sense of de-escalation or reasoning, so I would avoid it. But there can be a silver lining to this, and that is 100%. You know, using this as an opportunity for accountability and for really, you know, showing people that they are not exactly here to serve and protect at all times. And that's all I would say is I definitely wouldn't put myself in this situation again if I had the choice.
Yeah, fair enough. I agree. You know, it happens. You can never know how things are going to go, but it's a moment that, you know, that something positive can come out of it, and I hope that something positive continues to come out of it. So, you know, the next clip I want to play is the trip. So, you know, I understand that you were handed an assault charge on a police officer out of this altercation, I think, that I'm about to play, and that the trip is sort of the reason that you're being charged with that. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah,
okay,
that's exactly right.
So we'll play that clip, because it becomes very obvious when you watch this footage that you never tripped to this police officer. It was, in fact, someone else's leg altogether who got entangled with him. And actually, to me, I've watched it a few times. It looks to me like the policeman, when you look at him from the second angle that's going to be played, especially, it kind of looks to me like he's actually being aggressive. It almost looks like he's got a bit of a kicking motion toward you, and instead gets his foot tangled in with this different person who you never even touch him. So I'll play that, but that's kind of how I see this. I'll play it, and then, you know, you can say what you have to say, and anyone watching this can kind of see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he totally misses you. He looks to me like he's going for a kick.
Yeah, it's quite clear, honestly, that
Yeah. See there, you see him kind of. He looks like he's going for you, and he misses, and he gets this other guy, and it throws him off balance. That's how I see it.
Yeah, because he wants to get in on the detaining of me, and
right,
he's getting hooked up right there on someone else entirely, and just falls. And I mean, they read out the charge, and the official transcripts even read that I aggressively pushed him backwards, and that made him fall, and that is the assault charge. It was me pushing Officer Fisher backwards. That's who that is. And if you could see, I didn't push him at all. I'm not even touching him. The last thing he did touching me was reefing my head downwards as he was pushing me. And then he kicks somebody else, trips and falls, and flops.
Yeah, and so then there's one more clip that I want to play, and I thought this was kind of a shocking clip. It's you being basically sucker punched by the same guy.
Yeah.
So at this point, I believe the police have now grounded you. You've been isolated away from everybody else. So you're kind of now behind the line where the police are keeping people on one end, you're on the other end. You're being, it looks like 4 or 5 officers that are holding you down at this point. And this same guy, the guy who thinks, I guess, that you tripped him, decides he's going to get in some free shots on you while you're grounded. That's what it looks like to me. You look basically defenseless. You don't have your arms. And so I'm going to play that clip, and I'd like you to sort of give your commentary on that as well as we're watching that. Yeah, so you're just, you're being held down. As far as it's hard to see, but I don't think you've got your arms at this point. He's over you and he's taking it.
Yeah, he's literally just punching me straight in the back as hard as he can. And I'm pinned down by a bunch of other officers and being chokeholded at the same time. So I'm chokeholded, pinned down in different ways, and then the officer is, as you can see, literally just winds up a haymaker and lays it into me. And at that point, I had already, I think, been tased there as well. So the point where they have me on the ground and they're pinning me, they got people pulling one arm up and then another guy trying to put it behind my back. So they're just briefing me in every different way they can. And then another guy's choke holding me, and I hear use the taser. And then I get tased in the back for about 15 seconds straight. Wow. And then after that, he punches me. And I'm pretty sure, because based off the taser injection marks that I had, that he punched the spikes that were in my back from the taser, because the bruising and huge mounds I had around the injection marks, it's from his haymaker just laying straight into the spikes that I had in my back. So yeah, they were just insanely aggressive with me. And I mean, I as I'm getting chokeholded and I hear use the taser, I'm saying I'm not resisting with the very little breath and vocal cords I can get out. And then, they tased me still. Wow.
And so I imagine that's all in reports and everything. That's all documented.
Yeah, totally.
Has anybody even tried to defend that action? Have you heard anything about what was going through whoever's mind to do that to you?
No, I said to one of the officers hours later when they were trying to book me and stuff, I'm like, so is it protocol to tase somebody that you have pinned on the ground by 5 to 6 other officers while you're choke holding them as well? He's like, yeah, if they're resisting, that's totally fine. And I'm like, I wasn't resisting. Any resistance these officers felt was another officer's strength trying to pull me in another way. I'm a freaking rag doll between these guys, and they're doing whatever they want with any limb and ligament that I have. And stop resisting. It's I'm not, and I can barely even speak because I'm being chokeholded as well.
Were they I'm just trying to rationalize it. Were they trying to get you to stand up and move out, or was like, what, you know, to me, it's hard to tell because there's so much happening and there's so many bodies, right? That's the only way I could rationalize them accusing you of resisting, is if they're trying to get you to act a certain way and you're not. Is that what was happening, or were they just basically holding you down and basically punching you? 'Cause that's what I saw.
Well, I mean, I'll ask you this in return. If you were to be told to do something, it'd be different than not being told a single thing at all. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Right.
I didn't get told to do anything. I wasn't being told you're being arrested. Not a single utterance of you're under arrest, you're being detained, stop what you're doing, put your hands behind your back. Nothing. It was just like attack mode, and I was just like being manhandled and dragged around and slammed to the ground, and the only thing I'm hearing from them is stop resisting. It's like, I am not resisting. What do you want me to do? There's nothing, no instruction. It's just stop resisting as I'm reefed around in every single way, shape, and form, and then tased. And so like I said to many people now already, like if when I was saying over and over, what did I do? What did I do? If one of them would have been like, you're under arrest for, I would have been like, okay, sure, just take me. Like, please don't slam me and tackle me to the ground, because you guys have already been trying to rip me around and reef me around without saying anything. And they still say nothing, and they just kind of come in and pounce. And it's like, I just assaulted. That's pretty much it. It's like, what do I do at that point? It's crazy.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do either way. I mean, they've clearly gotten control of you at this point and isolated you from everywhere else. There's not much sense in you even fighting. I mean, it's an impossible battle, right? So now, you know, from what I understand, putting aside the way you were physically manhandled, put that aside. My understanding is that aside from that, the police did overstep on the action that they took that day. They misunderstood the order, right, as you were talking about. And so protests have resumed since, you know, maybe different than they used to be for the last year, but also differently than the way that these cops were kind of looking at the way that they were supposed to react to all this. So is that right? Can you sort of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I could say from anecdotal things that I've heard and seen through video, because I can't go to the protests anymore because the conditions they gave me, I'm not allowed to attend a protest. That's the blanket condition. So any protest ever, I can't go to. But at this point, they definitely have changed. I've kept up to date as to everything going on there, and I understand that they don't happen in the Beltline anymore in Central Memorial. They're not in a park. They're taking place at City Hall or the courthouse field, because the courthouse is provincial ground and it is also not part of a park. So they are still happening, to my understanding. And if there is any kind of walk or march of people, it's been happening on sidewalks or pedestrian areas. So they're still happening for sure. And my understanding is they've been in still decently large numbers, 1,000 plus.
So being in that park space where you were, where these police were trying to push you guys out, that is allowed, and it's continuing to happen as far as you know.
Well, yeah. So the thing is like they've moved from that park. They've technically moved out of a park. They're doing it at City Hall, which is not classified as a park, and it's essentially a loophole through this injunction. The injunction was only doing this to parks, and like the thing is like we're still technically there. They would be allowed to go to a park and host a rally or a protest there, but they wouldn't be allowed amplification devices. They wouldn't be allowed to make it so other people can't get into the park and stuff, which, I mean, it's never really been like that. Anybody can kind of walk in and in out of the park. But yeah, but they have moved for the sake of speeches, and the speeches have happened every time, and 1,000 people aren't going to hear an unamplified voice. It's just impossible. So they've moved for the sake of setting up speakers, I believe.
Okay. And so, so you get arrested. This is on the 19th. How long does it take for you to be released? And what all are the charges? Are there anything else other than this assault on this police officer who obviously tripped? are there any other charges there? And what were there any other terms to your release? I know you're not allowed to participate in these protests anymore. Is there anything else that's part of that?
So it was 24 hours of in custody. So I was at the remand for 24 hours and just held in like a solitary cell by myself. And I mean, I won't even go into depth with what it was like in there because it's just stupid, inhumane, light on the whole time, no drink when you want water, you don't get it. And you get a cement bench. They didn't give me a shirt or socks or nothing. I was covered in mud the whole time, just mud and dirt and blood. And they just, sat me on a cement bench for 24 hours pretty much. And so anyways, but after I got out, I've just been pursuing legal action from there. But the other aspect of my conditions when I went for bail was, like you said, the whole not allowed to attend a protest thing. But then there was I am not allowed in the downtown core of Calgary at any time ever. 24.
Wow.
Yeah. So for the whole, they've mapped out like a street by street by street box that I'm not allowed in. And when you map it out, it's essentially the entire whole downtown core of Calgary. It's a big, huge square kilometer radius. And I mean, I work down there. My mom lives down there. My sister lives down there. The courthouse is downtown. So if I was to attend my court date, technically I'd have to breach my own conditions to be there. And like City Hall's downtown. If I wanted to take transit to any part of Calgary, the train goes through downtown. Right. And there's just, freedom of movement is not even a thing really with that being a condition. And it's a blanket freaking area that I can't go in ever. And
you can't go to your job. You work downtown. You can't go there.
Yeah, I can't go down there. And so this whole last 2.5 weeks now, I haven't been able to work downtown. And we've had my lawyer push forward a change for my conditions, and the Queen's Court in Calgary is just taking however long they want to respond. And wow. I mean, by the Criminal Code of Canada's standards for conditions, they're supposed to not infringe upon your ability to make income. They're supposed to not infringe upon your ability to see family. And they're supposed to be as little infringing as possible upon your freedom of movement and everything like that. And just no consideration for that at all. And then the protesting as well is I've been at these protests covering them with my website, and I make income off that. That's another job that they're just essentially taking away from me in every single way. And wow. It just makes no sense. And then I have the whole no weapons, can't own, have, or carry weapons. And then I have to tell them where I live at all times. And if I move, I need to update them on where I move. And then that was another thing. My lawyer was just they say if you are going to move, you have to update them, and you have to update a bail officer. And they never assigned me a bail officer at all. And so they were just the most unorganized blanket conditions that are just entirely essentially illegal. It's crazy.
Now this isn't over though, right? So you have not been convicted of anything. This is still kind of in its pending phase, right? So you are going to have a date in court at some point, and you're going to kind of go through all the evidence and get that all sorted out. But it seems to me that the assault charge is probably out the window. The officer obviously got tripped up on an entirely different person.
You said the other charges, right? That was the other part that you asked. I do have the other charges, and that was the obstruction of the injunction.
Okay.
That's it. Blanket obstruction of the injunction. No specific part as to what part of the injunction I obstructed. Right. And then there was a third charge on there of obstruction of a peace officer. So obstructing a peace officer from doing his job of enforcing the injunction or something like that.
Okay.
Those are the three that they hit me with. Obviously, the biggest one being the criminal charge of assault of a police officer. The other ones are kind of more minor.
Yeah, fair enough. But they're still gonna have to really be able to prove those.
Yeah.
So I suppose we'll see how that goes. But I was wondering, that footage of the sucker punches that you're taking while you're being held down by multiple guys. I'm not a legal expert, but that looks to me like a little bit of an unnecessary use of maybe inappropriate force. Is that something you guys are talking about? Is this particular cop liable for anything in the way that he acted, in the way that he handled it?
Yeah, I mean, as far as what the proceedings really are for me in the near future is going to be 100% defense mode right now. So, like, I mean, the chances of this going to trial are very slim. They're likely going to be thrown out because of all the evidence we have, and the trial or the court's not going to want this to even really come to trial in a public term. But once that's done and dealt with, that's my main thing. I have to get rid of these criminal charges that are just bogus. But I will be suing the Calgary Police for sure. Like, there's a lawsuit that will be pushed forward on them the moment that these charges against me are dropped, and that will be the aspect of just unnecessary use of force, police brutality, negligence, and beyond like the arresting officers involved in the whole thing that occurred. It also is going to go further than that, to the point of like the city council, the police chief, the people who made this injunction a thing also are, well, it's an aspect of my charges as well, because they're trying to say that I obstructed the injunction. And without that being a thing, none of this whole thing would have occurred. And so, like, there is an aspect of negligence beyond just the police who were involved in this arrest. And beyond that, there's also the slander of character. The police chief has come out saying that I'm charged with assaulting a police officer and that I assaulted a police officer. And there's the witness statements of these officers all corroborating a story that I aggressively pushed an officer backwards. And these are all official statements that they're on under oath saying. So there's a lot of stuff here that they stepped over the line in many different ways. And like my number one goal in all of this, beyond defending myself, because that's absolutely key, is accountability, because it's ridiculous what occurred that day. It's actually just insane. And it makes me sad to say that I'm born and raised here in Calgary when that's what I see happen to a lawful protest that's gone on for like 2 years. So yeah, there's definitely an aspect to this where they will be held accountable for sure.
Yeah, well, that's only fair, right? I mean, they didn't do what they were supposed to do, and they went too far in the way that they handled things. And luckily, people all carry phones on them, and there were people there recording, and the truth is very evident when you watch the footage. So you'll get your justice eventually. I believe that. So before we wrap this up, Devlin, where can people? I know you brought up your website earlier. Where can people find the work you're doing and help you support the fight you've got on your hands right now?
Well, you can go to awakeningthepeople.net. That'll bring you right to my homepage of the website. It's pretty straightforward as far as navigating it from there. There's lots of news going back over the last 2 years covering all sorts of things. And even though I'm not down at these protests, I do have a crew down there filming and interviewing and covering them still. So it's up to date as of even this weekend. But beyond that, right on the front page, you'll see a big button for Calgary Police Brutality Legal Battle. And if you click that, it'll show you all the updated things with this case going forward from this point, even into the future. There's tons of video on there and different interviews that have occurred as well along the lines of what happened here. And on that page, you can also find the crowdsourcing information that is happening for the legal fees for defense. And even just sharing the story goes a million ways. And that is all I can ever ask for from somebody, is if they believe that what they see in this video or the videos on that website are wrong, then share it and let other people know what happened, because that really does a lot. And like I said, there is crowdsourcing being done on there. All the information's there. It's Devlin Legal Fund at outlook.com for e-transfers. But even just sharing is all I could ask for. So it's a long battle ahead, and I really hope that these things get tossed out of the court so that the battle is as short as possible.
Right. Perfect. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share your story here. I hope I can get you back on for an update as this sort of progresses further down the road.
Gladly. Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to update because, I mean, the aspect of the publicness of this arrest, I mean, it's my goal to let people know what happened to the end of it, because I mean, the Calgary Sun and the Calgary Herald ran headlines of me just hunched over, arrested, shirtless, being tossed in a van, and nobody knows what happened. They just said I assaulted a police officer. So I really feel like it'd be important for people to know the real truth of what actually happened here. So I appreciate you in every way for giving me the opportunity to tell the truth and to actually, you know, give a full picture here instead of a tiny little black and white portrait like the news loves to do. Yeah,
fair enough. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, you know, everything happens for a reason, and this happened to you in this moment, and the way you're handling it, I think is important. So thank you for that. And yeah, I'll stay in touch, and we'll do this again soon.
Thank you. And always keep a glass half full, man. That's the way you got to look at it.
100%. Awesome. Thank you, Devlin. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that and want to see more, hit the like button and feel free to leave a comment and tell me what you think. This content can be found on BitChute, Gab, Brighteon, Telegram, Rumble, Parler, Odyssey, and the Highwire. So please follow, subscribe, and turn post notifications on so you can know when the next post drops. Thanks, and see you soon.